All right. Hi, everyone, and welcome to our holiday hangout of sorts, our end of year session. And as you know, this year we've really been trying to deepen our community relationships across the board. And we've been hosting monthly community hangouts where we try to have informal discussions with our regional groups about climate and media issues that are relevant to those regions and those countries. So it's been a great experience so far, getting to know our community better and having these interactive sessions. So we thought that at the end of the year, we wanted to have this overall hangout across our regional groupings in a way that integrates our network a little better. And so today we've got an awesome lineup of speakers from our team who will be discussing with you the biggest climate stories of 2021 and what to look forward to in 2022. Then we'll also take a look back at some of the projects that we had this year and ones we have open now and some of the ones that we have on the horizon as well. So we'll also be live tweeting this hangout. And so if you want to chime in, please just use the hashtag climate tracker hangout. All right, so I'm not gonna delay much longer. I'm really happy to have you here with us, and I'll jump straight in. So, first of all, we have Sebastian Rodriguez. Now, before Sebastian joined us as editor in chief, he was the editor at the first climate news site in Central America. Based in Costa Rica, Sebastian has was also a Climate Tracker Fellow with us as well. So the floor is all yours, Sebastian, and we'd love to hear from you first up.
Thank you, Dizan, and thanks to everyone who joined. Um, I will be sharing my screen uh, briefly for this presentation. All right. So yeah, thanks to everyone who joined. This is just a brief recap of some of our projects and our stories in 2021 that we're very proud of. And so, yeah, we just want to tell you a little bit more about what we did with journalists from all over the world. So, a big highlight that I think was very important for all of us was the media mentorship, which is a regular mentorship program that um, we do here at Climate Tracker, where we assemble a team of journalists from all over the world, and we produce some stories with them. We give some training with both from our team and from guest speakers. And we produce some really great content, and the idea is basically to support these young journalists from many different countries all over the world, and to create some really great stories, but also for them to experiment with different platforms and multimedia uh, tools that allow them to tell stories and to experiment with storytelling in very different um, ways. So this is our last group of the media mentorship. This one ended uh, just in December, right? Just a few weeks ago. And we had journalists from all over the world, from Nepal, Argentina, Kenya, Solomon Islands, Nigeria, and India. And yeah, it was an example of a really nice group where were able to publish some great stories and to produce some great products. This program really came into life with the coronavirus pandemic back in 2020. So we've had already a number of media mentorship groups. This year, we also had a more numerous group at the start of the year, where we had 12 journalists join the fellowship and produce some more amazing stories. Again, it was a really diverse and powerful group that produced some really great stories. And yeah, we were really proud to reach pretty much corners of the world that really had some great climate stories, and that um, in many ways we hadn't uh, reached before. So this was this was a great experience and a great program for us, because it allowed us to put out some really some content that both us and both the journalists who participated in the fellowship are very proud of. So we were able to cover issues in both in uh, in local climate stories that often go overlooked, such as this one in Nigeria. This is just an example of of the types of stories we were able to produce. Um, and this was like a standard way in which our fellows were able to publish their stories in a written format. But what's great about this program is it allowed us as well to publish stories in different formats, and it allowed the fellows in general to experiment with different formats. So, for example, this is a photo essay that Lynn published in our Instagram account. It's called Heart of the Land, and it's about indigenous people in uh, in Thailand, and it's a really a really interesting look into the lives and the practices of these people. And at the start, it was meant to be an in-depth investigation of what their of what the lives of of indigenous people in Thailand was like, and it was about Lynn submerging herself in this community. And she came up with the idea to publish it as a photo essay. Uh, we we wanted to publish this story in a different format, in a more interactive and more experimental format. Eileen came up with the idea to publish it as a photo essay, and it ended up being a really great piece of work that you can check out in our Instagram account. And it's the type of work that we're very proud of, with the and the types of story that we're very very proud of to have supported and to have aided to produce. We were also able to put out a number of podcasts this year, which is also great. A number of them came from our fellows from the Media Mentorship program. Um, and yeah, many of them told us that it was a very interesting, another interesting way in which they could experiment. Um, if they were, for example, print journalists, many of them didn't hadn't engaged in podcasting or in live interviews, or even in photo essays of any sort. So it was kind of a way for them to experiment, and the same happened with fellows who were coming from a radio and TV background, who already knew this type of format very well, but hadn't had the chance to experiment with others. So this was this was part of what was great about the program. We also experimented with Instagram live interviews, where our fellows went into our Instagram account and interviewed experts from all over the world. In this case, this is Clara from Argentina. And yes, he or she's interviewing with an expert on wildfires in Argentina, and we did it through an Instagram live interview. And yeah, one of the things she said, for example, is it was something she had never done, and it was a bit nerve-wracking, but the interview went very well, and it's now something that uh, all of the fellows really who engaged in the program can take away. So as far as next year, this program will be launching a new call for applications. So yeah, if you are open to engage in this opportunity and produce monthly stories, engage in training with our team and with the best climate change and media professionals out there, then uh, yeah, don't hesitate to apply, and we would really love to see some applications for this program next year. Um, the program offers us a monthly stipend for the participation in the stories that we produce. So it's also a way of supporting young journalists in developing countries. We also worked with a group of fellows who engaged in solution stories and in climate solution stories, uh, which is a very modern trend, and they were able to also produce a lot of interesting stories, um, engaging in a maybe a different type of journalism and experimenting with it again in using many multimedia tools and many platforms. Um, and yeah, this was also one of our main programs, and in partnership with well with Climate Trackers partners, and it was uh, it was a really nice program to have, also with a very diverse team from basically the four corners of the world. So we were able to learn a lot from these fellows, and they certainly uh, told us that they were able to learn a lot about solutions journalism. Again, this was uh, the program. It's is meant to for it's meant for the fellows to produce one monthly story. So each month they were able to report on a local community initiative. Um, it was a very enriching experience in the sense that it's not the typical type of stories that they got to work on. So they got to learn a lot into community initiatives in local solution stories, and in connecting that to climate, and how these local solutions can contribute a lot to climate change. So a number of great stories came out of this that we're very proud of, and that we know they're very proud of too. Um, and we will be again launching a call for applications. I think this one is already open. So if you go to Climate Tracker's website, you can very easily apply for this new opportunity. We'll be opening a new group of fellows who will engage in our training, and again monthly stories that will be supported by a monthly stipend as well for the participation in the fellowship. And yeah, would be really happy to see a lot of applications from all over the world. So uh, yeah, if you're interested, then don't hesitate to apply, especially if you have a curiosity for solutions journalism and for local initiatives. Um, basically reporting on people that are making a difference from their communities to curb climate change. Definitely another highlight of the year was COP26. We ran our usual program for COP in a very non-usual time. So um, this was some of our in-person fellows. Uh, it's not all of them, but it was a nice picture um, of the group. We were able to take um, I think 10 in-person fellows to COP 26, which was in Glasgow, to cover the UN climate negotiations. And then we were also able, because of the pandemic and the limitations in general to travel around the world, we were also able to support a group of virtual journalists who covered the summit from a distance and produced really some great stories. What we noticed as well is the coverage on site is really important, but the coverage from a distance is also very important. In the end, the climate decisions that are being made in these rooms in Glasgow at the UN uh, end up affecting people back home. So having those stories from back home was proved to be really important, and had some really great stories. um, so we're very proud of this. These are our also members of our team. We're able to assist our fellows in Glasgow. That's Francisco, Lina, and Vienna. And yeah, we're really happy with how the that fellowship turned out, especially with all of the challenges we had to face because of the current pandemic. So yeah, it was really nice to have uh, a very strong group of journalists from developing countries and young journalists from developing countries to be able to represent their countries and to not even represent their countries, but uh, to report on the stories that matters to them. Um, that was really important to have, especially in a COP and in a summit that was particularly exclusive towards people from developing countries. So it was a great effort that I think showed some great results. In the end, well, as I mentioned, we were able to support 30 virtual and in-person journalists who covered the story in different ways. These resulted in more than 150 published stories related in one way or another to COP26 and to climate change. Um, and we were able to host three special webinars for them. And as you know, it as part of our fellowship, we also were able to conduct training and mentoring sessions with them, and it was very enriching both for us and for them. So we're very much looking forward for the next COP in the way in the sense that we can support even more journalists. So this was our experience with COP. Uh, I also wanted to highlight a few projects from Latin America. Maybe you know, or maybe you don't, but I am based in Costa Rica, which is a country in Central America. And as part of the region, I wanted to highlight a few projects we had in Latin America that I think were very interesting. One of them, for example, is our research program uh, in uh, in Latin America. This is a group of fellows from all over the region uh, who will be now doing media research in the region into energy coverage in the region. So that's something that we're very excited about. Um, as part of the group is coordinated by Itzel, who's our lead researcher in Latin America, and Francisco, who's our coordinator of programs and in our regional manager in Latin America. So we're very proud of that group as well, and uh, to be engaging in initiatives beyond just supporting journalists, but also supporting research in journalism. So that's one of the programs that we wanted to highlight. we hosted another group that focused on covering Chile's new constitution and its relationship to climate change. As you might know, Chile is a country in South America that's going up through a process of renewing its constitution. And it's been a very interesting process in which climate change has played a major part. And so this is a group that focused on covering those stories, and some really great content came out of this. Um, and definitely one of the main programs that we were able to host this year was a the program on the Escazú Agreement, which, if you don't know or you're not from the Latin American region, is a treaty that was signed among most countries in Latin America to protect environmental defenders and to give access to environmental information in all of our countries, and to support and increase participation in environmental projects. So this was a project focused on visibilizing the environmental defenders around the region through profiles of their work. And it was another very successful program in which we had uh, a numerous group of journalists that were able to do profiles of environmental defenders in their countries. Uh, and we were able to cover a lot of countries in the region, and we're now preparing a special to assemble them all. So we're very proud of that as well. And and as part of our programs for next year that we're very excited is the fact that we're opening up a new version of this program. So if you're interested, if you're from the region as well, and you're interested in covering stories from or profiling environmental defenders and covering stories from environmental defenders in your country, then you can happily consider to apply, as we will be very happy to have you. So this was a brief summary of our projects, and yeah, I'll pass it on to Disan. Thanks, thanks so much.
Thank you, Sebastian, for sharing with us those kind of like a quick recap of the projects that we had this year. And some of the projects, what's exciting is that some of these projects we will be continuing in 2022. So if they do sound exciting to you, I definitely invite you to go over to our website and check them out. And I'll be discussing the Solutions Reporting Fellowship a little bit more later on in the call. So next, we'll be joined by Chris Wright, and Chris is the founder and managing director at Climate Tracker. He's the one who is really steering this massive ship, and we're really happy to have him here with us today. So Chris, we're looking forward to hearing from you, and the floor is all yours.
All right, cool. Well, thanks to Zen, and thanks everyone. I'm wondering if my screen is being shared right now, or if it's not. I'm guessing it's not because I haven't like touched any big buttons. All right, let me see. Share screen. There we go. All right, so hopefully you can all see that, and I'll try and be quick. I kind of want this to be happy and fun. No one really wants to kind of be bored on this close to kind of Christmas and the end of the year. So this is kind of my little take on some of the biggest stories this year and what I think might be some of the biggest stories next year. And this is kind of things that is whether you want to be a part of Climate Tracker or not, hopefully as a journalist looking at stories, maybe this is a useful recap, maybe a nice little recap, look into the future. So, for some people, everything that happened in a period of about 2 weeks in November in 2021. But kind of if we think back beyond all the lockdowns, beyond all the COVID stories, there were a couple of interesting things that happened throughout the year that I think we need to kind of recap on. I think one of the biggest stories that wasn't really reported was on forests. Now, deforestation is at kind of much lower rate than it was in the 1990s, but it's still pretty high. So we're still cutting down about the size of Scotland every year. And Brazil in particular has, the largest rainforest landmass in the world, and it's hit a 15-year high in deforestation rates. Now, what that does tell you is that, in the 90s and the early 2000s, it was higher than that. But remember that, the rates that it was in those period was just kind of absolutely devastating. And what we have seen is a reversal in policies in Brazil that has a lot of people worried. But this is one of the other stories that kind of will be interesting to follow this year in particular, because Brazil is heading for an election at the end of the year. And certainly the candidates that are going to be running against Bolsonaro, who doesn't look that likely to win again, will come out with very, very different policies on deforestation. The question is, how much more forest is going to get cut down before the election. And with Bolsonaro, another candidate from the right in Brazil, kind of continues to wins and continues their policies at the moment. And another element around forests is that there's going to be this new kind of a mainstreaming of new satellite technology to try and better assess deforestation rates. And Malaysia was kind of caught out this year for effectively overcounting their forest carbon storage. So they weren't overcounting the amount of forests that they have. What they were doing is they were kind of caught out by estimating that their forests soaked up more carbon than, say, Indonesia's forests, which is interesting because Malaysia shares a border with Indonesia in the island of Borneo and Kalimantan. So I think there's going to be a lot more kind of opportunities to write stories on forests, forest monitoring and deforestation policies, especially as we now see this kind of 2030 deforestation pledge that has a lot of money in it that came out at COP26 this year, and kind of figuring out if that money is being well spent and figuring out if there's going to be any pushback on deforestation, which we've now seen in the European Parliament as they've effectively blocked meat sales from Brazil as a result of their deforestation rate. So there's going to be some interesting trade battles where forests, carbon kind of interlink with other jurisdictions and trade relationships. And I think that's a really interesting story to track. On finance, we saw a lot of money going into renewable energy in particular, probably less money going into things like agricultural innovations, but renewable energy in particular got piles and piles of money. But I think that kind of it's worth reflecting, and there's an organization, Oil Change, that does a lot of analysis on this, that, fossil fuel subsidies around the world still kind of creates this massive wall that renewable energy investments have to jump around and jump over. And I think that these subsidies will be a big focus of storytelling in 2022, because as the kind of social understanding of renewable energy and finance for things like solar and wind and hydrogen becomes more commonplace, it's just going to look worse and worse if there are these kind of well-known fossil fuel subsidies. And the US, for example, pays more than $20 billion a year in fossil fuel subsidies alone, and they're certainly not the only country in the world that does subsidize their industries to a massive sum. Some of the progress this year, the kind of G7, China, South Korea, a lot of the rich world basically said that they won't fund new coal in other countries. They haven't all committed to funding new fossil fuel investments in their own countries. And I think that that was shown at COP26. There was this announcement of the Beyond Oil and Gas Alliance, as well as coal announcements. And there's a very, very small amount of countries that are in that Beyond Oil and Gas Alliance, which is kind of an indicator of how far we are at from that kind of full carbon shift. And I think that kind of, obviously a big story around COP was that total climate finance was only around $79.6 billion in 2019. And that's obviously international finance, not necessarily domestic finance, but obviously we're way off track. There's a promise that that will hit the mark in 2023, the $100 billion mark, but there's a lot of weird accounting that goes on in figuring out that number. And I think that's another big story to dive into next year for anyone who's interested. On carbon, we are eating into the carbon budget as a world by about 10% per year for the last 3 years. So we've done about 30% of the carbon budget in the last 3 years, remaining, that is. And, for more and more scientists, I think you're going to see more and more sources who are climate scientists, analysts, experts, who are going to be saying things like it's going to be very difficult to kind of meet the 1.5 target. One of the important factors there is also not just looking backwards, but looking forwards. You look at investments that countries have made, and the finance sector kind of openly admitted this year to the fact that they have already invested in more than 1.5 degree carbon budget. So they've already invested in more projects around the world that would push us over the amount of carbon that we need to kind of stay below 1.5 degrees. So there is not only a need to invest in things like renewable energies, but there is a need to basically like drop a lot of those investments. And how that all plays out on a financial element, I'm not sure. One thing I do know that while the UN Security Council, while the UN climate kind of negotiations seem to have very little influence on how kind of global conflicts and climate kind of plays out, certainly the World Trade Organization does have a lot of influence on how global trade plays out. So if these investments start shifting into the kind of, era of big companies suing countries for kind of not allowing them to tap into all their investments, it's going to be a very interesting story to track. And then I think that kind of particularly on coal, as Europe has now, at least Western Europe has now effectively a clear plan to phase out coal by 2030, particularly with Germany's new announcement. A lot of exciting things happening in Germany in the next 6 months. But as Western Europe has effectively chosen to phase out coal, and as the carbon price in Europe kind of makes it harder and harder for Poland and the Balkans to afford their kind of coal investments, I think there's going to be a lot more pressure and focus on Asia. And the IEA is estimating that 2022 could be kind of the biggest ever year for coal consumption and demand. So that could really kind of change a lot of the narratives around carbon budgets, how seriously we're taking climate change next year, particularly as this kind of energy crisis plays out. So that's kind of three of the big stories that I think will overlap from last year to this year, and kind of some stories to look out for that I would recommend journalists thinking about if they're not already thinking about it. The first one is gas. This is something that we saw more and more kind of become a kind of a powerful narrative or a common narrative around the world. Climate Analytics released a report around COP26 saying that gas is the new coal, and effectively highlighted the carbon footprint of gas, particularly as methane is about 86 times more powerful over a 20-year period than carbon from coal burning. So it's kind of a very, very big focus for short-term emission reductions and short-term kind of climate focuses. We're going to see a really interesting story play out next year. There is a lot of speculation as to what might happen in the short term on kind of gas demand, but there will certainly be, I think, a lot of focus on how kind of particular markets in Asia kind of shift away maybe from coal towards gas. So there is a lot of kind of suspicion or concern that a lot of countries in Southeast Asia might start relying really heavily on LNG in particular, that the US is going to become the biggest LNG exporter next year, and that kind of in the background of both hydrogen and renewable energy plans, there will be this narrative around gas as an important, basically kind of balancing act for energy systems. And I think that that's kind of a really interesting topic to dive into, whether it is or is not the case, but also kind of how countries are approaching that balance, and whether they're actually emphasizing renewables or kind of, you know, using much more gas than they potentially need. I think cars will be a very big story in the next year as well. You know, Toyota recently announced that they're investing about $35 billion into battery-powered electric vehicles over the next couple of years. And, you know, if you look at European car makers, Korean car makers, Japanese car makers, there are these massive plans to roll out electric vehicles. And if Joe Biden and the Democrats in the US get some of their climate plans kind of across the line, there will be a massive legislative backing for the US car manufacturers to do the same. And obviously Tesla is kind of globally famous for electric cars. But interestingly, you know, Elon Musk was speaking to the Wall Street Journal's kind of conference recently, and he basically made a pretty convincing argument saying that as cars get more automated, so driverless vehicles, for example, then we'll simply have more of them rather than less of them. So this leads to more traffic in one ways, and will make kind of urban design really interesting. Things like the 15-minute city might become a big talking point of kind of green shifts in cities, but also it means that there'll be a massive question around where batteries come from. And I think following the lithium supply chain is a massive story in Latin America, is a massive story in China, and kind of will become a massive story over the next couple of years, but also not only where it comes from, but what happens in terms of recycling and where it goes after its lifespan, I think is a big story to look into. Justice, I think, will be another massive narrative. And I think there's kind of 4 interesting stories I want to highlight here. There is going to be a lot more focus on the victims of climate impacts. There's already a lot of focus in the US, where I see a lot of great reporting on kind of particularly class elements and climate impacts, air pollution, energy projects, coal mining, things like that. And I think that lens will start to kind of become popular in many other parts of the world, where similarly kind of poor communities, marginalized communities are usually facing the brunt of mining and pollution activities. And I think that kind of another element of the justice story will be how the WHO air pollution guidelines play out going forward. They revise their air pollution guidelines down quite significantly for the amount of particulate matter that they consider to be healthy in a city. And that basically means that 90% of the world's living in polluted cities. And if that plays into kind of any activism, any storytelling, any legislation, will be really interesting this year. I think you'll see a lot of lawsuits around the world. The kind of the increase in rate of kind of legal action on climate is incredibly it's incredible to see on a graph. And an example in Australia is Equity Generation Lawyers, who basically is a law firm entirely designed just to take the government to court on climate. And they've already created some interesting legislation on the right to protect, the right to have a safe future for younger generations. The Human Rights kind of Council at the UN approved a right to a safe environment as a human right this year. And I think the Escazú Agreement is another example of how human rights and justice and legislation can play into kind of climate action going forward. And it's just an awesome story to report on. I think there will be another element of justice, which is on fossil fuel industries. In Eskom in South Africa is going to be a massive story over the next year. South Africa is a kind of a country that has a massive reliance on a singular energy utility that has a massive coal fleet. and there's a lot of South Africans that are employed in the coal mining and coal power sectors, a lot of Southern Africans that are employed in those sectors, and how those employees are taken care of while the country tries to transition towards renewable energies with this kind of large support package from the European Union will be really, really interesting to watch. And I think that there's similar kind of transitions going on in different countries. And if there isn't a just transition narrative in your country, that's something that you could definitely dive into as a reporter. And finally, I think carbon markets and Indigenous rights will be a big element of that justice narrative next year. Indigenous peoples got about $1.8 billion worth of support as part of this $20 billion forest plan at COP26. Not only tracking down that money will be interesting, but also tracking down how carbon markets intersect with Indigenous rights. There is an interesting series of stories published by John Cannon on Monga Bay about a massive carbon market deal going down in the state of Sabah, in the island of Borneo in Malaysia. And it's talking about like 2 million hectares of forest. It's kind of apparently been signed over to the shell companies that are based out of Singapore. It's an incredible story. It's a horrendous justice, a horrendous insight into how these deals might play out, and how the scale of these deals, and how the relationship between governments, the private sector, and Indigenous peoples might just get kind of expanded a lot in the kind of years to come. And finally, I think net zero is going to be a big story of 2022. You know, when BlackRock kind of CEO sent a letter to companies in, I think it was the start of last year, if not the start of 2020. It was something that a few reporters picked up, and then throughout the year, we just saw, bang, massive amounts of net zero plans kind of hit the market. And almost every major corporation now, it seems, has a net zero plan of some kind. Whether or not those net zero plans actually mean they change their business model, or they just rely on a lot of offsets, whether they're planning to move fast or wait until kind of the late 2040s to do anything, whether our forests, soils, rivers, and the ocean can continue to actually be carbon sinks, and whether they'll actually plant trees and where all those trees will grow, I think are massive questions, and it's a massive opportunity for journalists to dive in around the world. And this is particularly where journalists in developing countries have a unique opportunity to kind of tell stories that no one else can, because a lot of these offsets are looking at developing country markets where there might be some land that governments can acquire easily, or there might be some forests that governments can take ownership of and maybe kind of sell off to private sector. And how that all plays out, I think, is going to be a massive story to look into. So that's my kind of guesses for some of the big stories to look into next year. And I hope you'll join us. If you have ideas, please share them with us. I'd love to hear them. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much, Chris. And thank you to Chris and Sebastian for sharing that information with us. Sebastian for the sort of recap of the projects of 2021, and Chris for really giving us some insightful information about stories that happened in 2021 and some areas that are kind of ripe for storytelling in 2022 as well. And we're really grateful for having you here with us. And I want to know now if we have any questions from our participants. So I saw that there was one question, and I think it was actually directed to Chris. And it's, what do you think, basically, what do you think are some of the stories that can be told specifically from a developing country perspective in 2022? Chris, do you want to take that question?
Yeah, it might be better for Sebastian to take it. I mean, he is in a kind of a developing country, in a developing country region, I guess.
Yeah.
But you know, as an initial reaction, I don't see any stories that can't be told from a developing country perspective. But Sebas, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I also don't have in mind any issues that can't be reported on. Um, but yeah, I mean, certainly there are some issues that you should report on with um, with some level of caution, especially if it means a danger of some kind to you. Um, Illegal deforestation and for example, or illegal activities that generate pollution, or generally in some regions, for example, dealing with large environmental projects where there are um, massive interests also can lead to danger to for journalists. So in general, those issues tend to be a little bit more delicate to cover, but I wouldn't say they can't be covered. In fact, I think they should be very much covered. Um, so yeah, generally, I agree with Chris in that I don't think we shouldn't tell any particular stories.
I mean, you're definitely right, Sebas. There are kind of incredible dangers for journalists in particular countries. And I think journalists in those countries know those dangers better than anyone else does. Because, anytime a colleague is threatened or kind of harmed, it's going to kind of hit the industry harder than it hits anyone else. But I think that kind of, some of the trends that I think we see now, um, in particularly American reporting, the Black Lives Matter movement created a justice lens for journalists in the US that I think just kind of didn't exist in the mainstream media until then, and now is kind of becoming an important element of almost all reporting, let alone climate reporting, and it's certainly kind of affecting a lot of the ways in which climate reporters, environmental reporters look at any story now, I think. And I think that that's a lens that could be something that many journalists um, in other countries kind of could also play with and look into some more. It's not always as stark, the class differences, but I think that there are kind of unique perspectives that you can play on, and particularly when you're selling stories internationally, you can kind of highlight the class differences, the elements of marginalization, the different power imbalances that are going on in your stories, that maybe you can't or you don't feel as comfortable telling domestically. So certainly I think it has opened up a lot of opportunities for developing country reporters who want to sell their stories to developed markets, because those justice angles are now more commonly understood in developed markets. But I think domestically, kind of what stories you can tell, I mean, there's a million and one stories to tell. And there's, stories around your energy transition, stories around, climate finance, carbon markets, stories around kind of rich and poor, and stories around, anytime a kind of a large storm hits, you can not only tell a story around the victims of those large storms, around the injustice globally, but you can also tell an important story around, did the local mayor do everything that the local mayor could have done to protect those people? And were some people more vulnerable than others because of, who their government is or who they are, and how society sees them? So I think kind of diving into those layers of storytelling is always kind of a powerful thing to do, whether you are in a developed or a developing country.
Yeah, for sure. And okay, so yeah, I see we have a question from Conscious Planet. Conscious Planet, I don't know what your name is, but you can just introduce yourself and ask your question as well.
Okay, hi, my name is Sharad. I just wanted to ask you guys if you have any perspective on sustainable food systems and how important could they be from their environmental perspective and in terms of engaging the masses really to do something small in terms of their own day-to-day lives to bring about this climate change and fight the climate change.
Sebas, you want to try it?
Sure. I mean, yeah, engaging with food systems, I think, well, generally, I think we all know that it's a massively important issue. I think it's around a quarter of emissions worldwide come from issues related with land use and food systems. So it definitely is a critical issue to delve in as journalists. And well, generally, I would also think that there are many opportunities as storytellers within this issue that we can, uh, as uh, as journalists, rely on to tell good stories. Um, I mean, food systems are massively related to culture and to people, really. So there are huge opportunities there to tell stories. And we have actually focused on food systems on a number of projects. We held a fellowship focused on food and farming in relation with climate. And it it was precisely that. It was a way to encourage journalists to and to support journalists who want to tell these types of stories focused on food and on climate. And there were some great stories that came out of that fellowship that I think are perfect examples of how we can tell good stories and relate those um, to climate and and in the relationship with food systems to environmental issues. And generally, I think the best ones and the ones I like the most had some aspect of relationship to culture and to values of communities that I think are very intrinsic with food in general, because yeah, it's super connected with culture in general. So yeah, I think that's, for example, one opportunity to look at to look at it. Chris, I don't know if you wanted to add anything.
I mean, I think it kind of needs to be tied to a kind of a bigger issue, if you like. I think food systems are just kind of too complex and diverse and rely on so many different things. So if you're looking at kind of sustainable transport, you're looking at like shipping and kind of buses and trucks and stuff like that. And I think that's an issue in itself that's linked to sustainable agriculture and food systems, if you like. I think soils is a massive thing, and kind of there's some interesting projects around kind of tracking fungal networks around the world and kind of seeing if soil carbon can continue to soak up as much carbon as it has in the past, given the different kind of agricultural systems we have. And I think the kind of the deforestation stories, effectively a story about food systems in many ways, whether it's kind of palm oil or soy or beef, or it's kind of basically you're looking at kind of food systems. So I think kind of focusing on those kind of simpler elements, if you like, deforestation being simpler than a systematic approach to agriculture, might be a kind of an easier hook for journalists to dive into. But I think the kind of the methane element of it is a big part as well. And there was some kind of, I think methane is becoming more and more understood by journalists, particularly the short-term impacts. The IPCC revised up their methane estimates kind of this year. And, if you take those numbers and you do a little bit of data on localized kind of methane production, you can get pretty scary things on a short term that you can effectively cut out. So I think kind of for journalists diving into that's a really interesting thing, but you probably will also see some very interesting kind of shifts in food consumption patterns going forward. A lot more countries who haven't had access to a lot of meat in the last 20 years will probably start eating a lot more meat. And the countries that do eat a lot of meat probably won't change anytime soon. So I think for journalists, that kind of that focus on meat over the next year is going to be difficult. But I think kind of focusing on something around, soil carbon, the impacts of methane, deforestation, and things like the shipping and aviation and trucking industries could be good hooks to kind of get into that sort of story. But it is one of those things that comes under that kind of carbon lens that we too often have when we report on climate, where we're just kind of so focused on, the carbon dioxide equivalent impact, and not necessarily focused on kind of everything else in the world, and all of the other kind of planetary boundaries and limits. So I think it's one of the kind of challenges of how much our narrative is fueled by carbon dioxide emissions, and how do you kind of fit something as complex as food systems into that to kind of get enough stories. So I think that's kind of what I think is probably some of the elements holding it back. It's a little bit complex, but there's definitely hooks.
Thank you. And we have
Thank you.
another question from Ayaz Khan, who is one of our contributors from Pakistan. Ayaz, you can feel free to oh, his mic isn't working. Okay. All right. So, all right, I'm just gonna ask Ayaz's question for you guys. And he actually had a question for Chris directly. And the question was, if automobile companies turn to battery generated vehicles, isn't it going to complicate the climate, given the lithium ion batteries are also detrimental to environment? How do you see this?
Well, not so much climate. I mean, if you compare the idea of kind of continuing to run internal combustion engines and expanding that to more and more car consumers over the next 20 years versus the idea of all of those car consumers driving a lithium powered battery, I think the kind of climate impact is massively different. So I wouldn't kind of focus on lithium in terms of a climate angle. I'd probably refer to Francisco, who is on this call and is our kind of team leader in Latin America. He does a lot of reporting on lithium in the past, and kind of will continue to do so going forward. So he knows a lot more about the kind of emissions of mining lithium, for example. But I think the impacts on the way that lithium is mined it's a massive impact on local water systems, and it has a massive impact on kind of the places and the people who have to do that mining. So I think that's kind of one of the big elements. A lot of that mining comes out of China. A lot of Uyghurs are involved in that, it seems, at the moment. And then there are kind of a lot of lithium deposits in places across Latin America where there are kind of very vulnerable ecosystems and very marginalized people. So, it has a massive impact on those ecosystems and societies. But this is going to be an interesting question going forward. How does that potentially lithium revolution, there could be other battery sources going forward, but how does that play out with all of these kind of ecosystems and populations and government dynamics? And remember that lithium is not just being used as a battery source for cars. It's being seen as a backup storage option for many electricity systems. And I think you'll see more and more countries, particularly countries with a bit of money, start to just build lithium batteries all across their countries to kind of shore up local energy supplies and to make those kind of communities and local towns and cities a little bit more sustainable. There's a big example in South Australia, the town of Adelaide, city of Adelaide, where basically Elon Musk in a year built them a battery that is now kind of providing a massive amount of their electricity storage for all of their kind of renewable energy production. So, this stuff can happen very quickly, and it can happen on a very large scale. So lithium will become a massive story over the next couple of years, and particularly as more and more countries start to kind of try to transition their energy systems and expand on their energy systems already. So I wouldn't say a climate thing, but I would say, in terms of a bad thing, I would say that, how this is extracted, like all mining, is going to be an interesting story.
Definitely. And I see that we have a question from Victor. Victor, would you like to ask your question now?
Hello. You hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Hello, good morning from Mexico. How are you, everyone? Amigo Sebastian, ¿qué tal? Well, I have a question for you both. Is there a story I'm trying to concentrate on, like these modern tendencies of technology? And let's say that if there's a movement of NFTs and artists, just to focus on another perspective of how new forms, not the biology side or not the agriculture perspective, but how can artists maybe help out with this new technology like Bitcoin and NFTs? And I know that there's also the discussion that Bitcoins generate pollution, but focusing on how artists can help bring consciousness or maybe even change, like selling art as an NFT to fund the Vaquita project or Air River projects. So is there a story that may be interesting for Climate Tracker? Thank you.
Well, yeah, I mean, I haven't, or at least I'm not up to date with such initiatives. I'm sure there are many in which artists fund or help to move funds for local initiatives. I would say it's as in any solutions focused story. It's important to see if there are preliminary results, if those funds actually going to the people that need them and actually are if they are working for the people that need them, if they're again, as a solutions-based story, it would also be important to see which problems is it trying to address, if it's moving funds towards something related to climate change really, or if it's related to any other environmental issues. And generally, if there are limitations to it as well, generally there are no there are no perfect solutions in any type of initiative. So it's good to also analyze what are the limitations of artists moving funds for climate in that way. For example, I'm not sure if they can move, for example, massive amounts of funds through through just that. So yeah, I mean, it definitely sounds like an interesting topic, but yeah, I'm not feeling it's super specific. As long as you don't analyze those issues as well.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, just on this, I mean, NFTs, Bitcoins, Ethereum use a massive amount of energy. There's a lot of good reporting on that. I think it uses a similar amount of energy to the country of Ireland each year or something like that. And you know, a couple of artists in an article that I just shared have, you know, quite actively tried to block certain art dealers kind of engaging in NFTs because of the environmental impact. There's a case study there of a guy who made $69 million on his NFT. He promised to make it all carbon neutral in the future. I think that all kind of plays into the net zero carbon neutrality, carbon markets debate, which is really complicated and is all based on kind of future actions, right? Which is for me kind of like when billionaires say, you know, I'm going to give all my money away when I die. It's like, well, it doesn't really help the fact that you're kind of stealing all this money now, and then, you know, when you don't need it, you can give it all away. Someone saying they'll make it kind of carbon negative in the future is kind of one, playing with science. It's kind of not necessarily perfect, and is two, just kind of playing with future aspirations, which I'm sure there's a great philosopher who's dived into this, but you know, I think it kind of plays into that element. But if there is kind of activism around this stuff, I think that's always a good story. and if there is alternatives to these markets that are more environmentally friendly, you know, that's a massive story, because it's effectively it would be similar in terms of emissions as, you know, an opposition party in Ireland saying we're going to kind of reduce our emissions by a certain amount. So it's a massive amount around the world, and if there's a way of cleaning that up, then investigating that is really interesting. I don't mean to cut any future questions, by the way, but I think you know, we have some other presenters as well.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. All right. Well, thank you so much for those questions that came in. And now we're about to hear from our Asia team. They've been this year really cooking up some awesome new projects, and they made a big announcement recently. So I won't speak about it too much. I'll pass you straight over to Yvonne and Quimby, who are our in-house media researchers, and they've got some news to share with you. So Yvonne and Quimby, the floor is yours.
Hi everyone, nice meeting you all. So I'm just gonna share my screen. Wait a second. Can you see it now? Oh. I think I have to ask Yvonne to share her screen.
Okay, yeah, I'll share.
I'm so sorry.
Let me try. Sorry, I think mine's a bit. Sorry, yeah, give me a sec as well.
So actually, we are working with this project for 3 months now. So I think it's sharing now.
Yeah, it's
Is it
starting to
working?
share. It's starting to share. It isn't loaded yet.
Okay, so this is okay. So this is the climatetracker.asia website. So I have I'm working with Yvonne and Langit with this project, and of course with our Asia manager Vienna. So in this website, we are trying to share with you different information and resources about climate in countries, I mean, from Philippines, Indonesia, and Malaysia. So if you can see on the screen, we have here different content, such as we have the fact sheets, we have here the fact sheets, the experts, the research, and the insights, the glossary, the news, press releases, events, and videos. So we are still trying to come up with the contents of this website. So we're just gonna show you what we have for now. So if you go to fact sheet, Yvonne, can you click the fact sheet part? So if you're gonna go to the fact sheet, so we have prepared here information regarding climate stories that you can use in your report. So we have here different topics, including the recently concluded COP26. So in different perspective from the Philippines, Indonesia, and Malaysia. And we are also have here topics regarding the net zero goals of the 3 countries, and of course, deforestation and forest policies from the different countries. We are also working on collaborating briefs from Indonesia and Malaysian countries. So we are working on the sea level rise. As you can see, we have uploaded 3 topics on the website, and we are still working on 5 more topics. So I think that's for the fact sheets part. We have also the expert section. Okay. So we have contacted different researchers and experts of climate from the 3 countries, and you can directly contact them and ask them for interviews if you are interested in, for example, sustainable agriculture or disaster resilience, or of course, climate change in general. You can click their website or their profile, and you can check their email. So as a researcher from the Philippines, I think the website is something that will help me to popularize different research and development outputs from the 3 countries, because here in the Philippines, we have very limited numbers of journalists who are reporting climate stories. So I think Climate Tracker Asia is a good platform for the journalists to, check or try to report different climate stories from the context of their countries. I think I'm gonna have to pass floor to Yvonne. Would you like to add something?
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, thank you, Kimby. Yeah, essentially what she said, I'm just going to echo what she said. That basically Climate Tracker Asia is what we found with most journalists, was that even though, yeah, they are passionate about climate change, but there was kind of a lack of data or research that focused specifically to Asia. And so we wanted to sort of create, fact sheets that would be specific to, for now, 3 countries: Indonesia, Philippines, and Malaysia. So as you can see, I don't know if I can pick one, but they are also all under Creative Commons. So you can just copy it and put it into your, let me just find one. Yeah, you can copy it with the graphs and so on and put it into, let me just, sorry. Yeah. I don't know. Yeah, all texts are created by Climate Tracker available under Creative Commons attribution. They can be copied, shared, and made publicly accessible by users so long as they give appropriate credit, provide link to license, and indicate changes that were made. And we felt that this helps to sort of frame ideas, give context, sources, and insights for journalists to tell powerful climate stories. And besides the experts and fact sheets, we also wanted to do sort of weekly newsletters on key climate updates and regional politics, and also create a more regionally focused media network as well. Yeah, and want to basically do this all in contribution as a one-stop shop for climate journalists in the ASEAN region. So yeah, and we also have Langit here, who is the Indonesian researcher. So maybe I should pass it to you then. Yeah.
Thank you, Yvonne
Are you
and
the Langit?
Kimby. Yes, it's pretty much already summed up what this new platform is for. So basically, it's for everyone. For now, it's still just Indonesia, and the Philippines, and also Malaysia. But we really hope that next year we can develop with more countries, because even right now you can already see different news from different Asian countries. We really, really hope that in the future we can improve the membership as well. So if you are covering climate issues in Asia, or you're from Asia, or if you have like colleagues or friends, researchers, journalists who are covering climate change or climate issues in Asia, we definitely invite you to join our membership here so we can connect with fellow climate and environmental journalists all over Asia. For now, especially Indonesia, the Philippines, and also Malaysia. So hope you can join us soon, and perhaps see you next year. Thank you. I return this to Dizen.
All right. Thank you so much, Asia team, for sharing the work that you've been doing. And I know that it's a big announcement for you guys. So congrats on that. And before we say goodbye, I'd like to let you know that right now we currently have a new fellowship that's open. And you would have heard, if you were here earlier, you would have heard Sebastian talk about it as well. And that's our Solutions Reporting Fellowship. And this is in partnership with One Earth. And basically, this is a global opportunity. Basically, we're looking for reporters between 18 to 35 years of age who would like to join a 6-month-long program that will see them benefit from one-on-one mentoring. You also receive a monthly stipend during the duration of the fellowship. You get the chance to expand your publishing profile, network with a global team of reporters, and potentially also get the projects that you report on listed on One Earth's project marketplace, where your story and projects will be visible to international funders. So it's a pretty big deal. And if this sounds like something you're interested in, I am posting the link to that opportunity right now in the chat, and I will advise you to check it out if you're interested in learning more about it. What you need to do is pitch us a local sustainability solution story, and that's basically it. It's a pretty simple process to apply. So I hope that that you do take the chance to apply for this opportunity. And basically that's it for today. But before we go, I'd like to take a group picture. So if you like to, if you don't mind, you can just turn on your video, and let me just do a group shot. Oh, hi. I'm seeing people that from the community. It's nice to see you, Jairus and Hezron. It's nice to see you guys. All right. So in 2 seconds, I'm going to take a snap so you can smile. I'll do another one. 1, 2. Right. Good poses. All right. So thank you so much for joining us. In some cases, I know it's like your late morning, your early morning, or your late night. So I'm really happy that you're here with us and you took the time to stay and hear what our speakers had to say. And I hope that you learned something new. You got some ideas for your storytelling in 2022. And I had a great time hearing from everyone. So I want to take this chance to wish everyone a happy holiday season and a happy new year. And I look forward to all the stories that you'll be publishing in the new year. So thanks everyone for joining us. Bye.
Hey, thank you.
Bye. Thank you.